Our guest today is Professor Sandra Danilovic. She is a professor in the game design program in the Faculty of Human and Social Sciences on our Brantford campus. Welcome, Sandra.
Jonathan, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Before we begin, I just want to ask if you haven't done so already, if the audience could mute their microphone. And if you would like to ask questions, we'd love to hear them. If you just pop them in the chat, I will try to get to them, time permitting. So with that, I'd like to just launch off with today's episode by asking Sandra to tell us a bit about your background. How did you come to be working at Laurier?
Thanks, Jonathan. So I've got a kind of a rich, I suppose, background. I started out working as an artist and a filmmaker for 20 years prior to entering academia. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts in film and video production, and I segued from visual arts, painting, photography into film. And then slowly from there on, I entered sort of digital media, games, and my current engagement with research. So I was a documentary filmmaker for almost 20 years. I made documentaries on social issues. I've made a couple of films on the immigrant experience. One on, growing up Jewish, Italian, and Black in Toronto's Little Italy during the Great Depression. So and then the second film is also on launching a new life in Canada as an immigrant. Both of those films, I had quite a bit of success. My first film was broadcast on PBS back in 2001. My second film was a commission by Rogers Omni Television. And then I slowly started to, as I was a struggling filmmaker with my own production company, trying to raise funds for my films that I produced and directed and wrote, I started to slowly get into teaching, and then web design and game design. And slowly but surely, I decided to do a master's in digital media, and my focus became virtual worlds and games. And then I made a third film, which was autobiographical as well, semi-autobiographical. The documentaries on the immigrant experience were also autobiographical, but more implicitly so. So then I made a film, Inside Second Life, which is this virtual world. This is my third film.
Inside Second.
Sorry?
Inside Second Life, you made the film.
Inside Second Life. I filmed, I filmed inside the game engine, it's this genre of film called machinima, which is machine, cinema, and animation. It's a portmanteau word. And that film, Second Bodies, was exploring female self-image, mental health, and disability. And it's semi-autobiographical. Two other friends of mine are in it. And it's also exploring digital avatar identity. So digital identity and avatar identity. And that got me into gaming and game design. Thereafter, I completed my PhD at University of Toronto in information studies.
Right.
And I am a game design scholar, essentially. That's my area of expertise. And here I am, a year after I received my PhD, I arrived at Laurier.
It's more than a year, isn't it? I feel like we talked prior to the pandemic. So I'm using that as my gauge of all time now. Was it before or after the pandemic?
It's been 2 years. So this is,
Okay.
I'm entering my third year at Laurier.
Gotcha. Yeah. I'm curious if you, I mean, given that background, have you had any professional contact with English and film studies here at Laurier?
I have not, Jonathan. I am embarrassed to say, but I would love to have contact with researchers in and colleagues in those departments.
I will be happy to introduce you because I think there's some great things you could talk about there. And also, I wondered on the immigration the immigrant experience stuff, whether you'd had any contact with the immigration research center that we have, the IMRC here. It's in the Balsillie School. In fact, they've shown a bunch of I don't know, a bunch. I mean, they have definitely shown films in the past that are about immigrants and the immigrant experience and immigration and migration too. The IMRC is Immigration and Migration Research Center. Have you had any contact with them? Okay, well, I have to introduce you to them too. So good. Well, that's one of the things that we want to get out of these get to know series is we want people to know each other across campus and facilitate those kinds of interdisciplinary activities because lots of the really interesting questions in research happen at the boundaries, at collisions of disciplines, and you're certainly working in a variety of those intersections. Well, let me move us along a little bit and ask you. So you said you're a game design scholar. How would you describe your research program? What is it that you're really trying to achieve with your scholarship?
Great question. So it can be very deceiving when I say to people I am a game design scholar, because ultimately I study the design process in order to understand something bigger about the human condition and about being human. So there's a few things that my research is about. First of all, just generally speaking, broadly speaking, I study the experiences of game designers and artists making games, informed by their personal stories with illness and disability and trauma. So that's my subspecialty. So I study autobiographical games and the process of making autobiographical games. And because I study this subgenre, the illness and disability narrative, the autobiographical illness and disability narrative rendered in computer games, I sort of bridge three separate disciplines: game studies, the medical health humanities, and disability studies. Now there's more. I study game design practice in the context of a time and place. And in my case, that's the game design workshop, or so-called game jam, right? When people get together and they are invited to come together in a place and time to make games and collaborate on game design and socialize and network and share skills and bond and connect with each other. So there's the personal dimension of making games about oneself and constructing selfhood, articulating selfhood through game design. And there's also the communal connection, building community and building these communities of mutual care through these types of game design practices, autobiographical game design practices. So I consider myself a humanist, but I work with artists and designers. So in that sense, I work with study respondents, and I'm a qualitative researcher, and I organize these game jams for research purposes.
So you're doing research on them while they're designing the games. Yeah.
Absolutely. So it's a research process driven by creation. So it's process, but it's also making games as part of the research outcomes. And so in that sense, my research is arts-based because I study the creative process, and it's also participatory because usually the community aspect and community building is a really important dimension of my research, and engaging communities for purposes of empowerment and advocacy and a host of other things.
Let me ask you this. So you're primarily studying the game designer, and I guess because these are autobiographical and they're in this sort of disability, I don't know if that's a genre, but anyway, in that area. And presumably there's all sorts of dimensions of health and well-being for the game designer. Is there any aspect that you look at the players who then use these games, and is that first of all, is that a dimension of your research or of anybody's research? And then if it is there some impact of sort of I think of the way you describe it, I think of the game designers as really putting a part of their self into this game. And does that have an impact on the player?
Great question. So, typically speaking, in my field or fields like human computer interaction, which is a subfield of computer science, the focus is on the so-called user or player who
right.
engages with the piece of software, or the software technology, or the machine, or the computer. And in my case, it's not so much the user, the player, as it is the designer, who themselves are also playing the game, but also other designers. So there is a kind of designer-centric focus of my work, because ultimately the game making process has a lot of benefits for the designer. It can be a tool of sense making. So making a game is a kind of sense making process that helps designers interpret their lived experiences through game design, articulate them through game design, and then create these material objects, a game, a work of art. So there's three parts to the process, and though that sense-making process can be very therapeutic and cathartic and healing for game designers. So in that sense, when I use the word therapy in my work, I actually have another word, which is therapoetics, which is what I use. That's why my work is called game design therapoetics, in the sense that I take therapy in the context of my work to be a cultural activity, not a medical or clinical activity or outcome. So in that sense, like I'm redefining health and well-being from the vantage point of creativity and creation, and what kind of benefits creativity can have on and the creative process can have on health and well-being.
I feel like we could continue this part of the conversation for another several hours. It's a rich area and really fascinating, at least to me anyway. So I'll catch you up at Brantford one day and continue on that part of the conversation. I'd like to just shift gears a little bit and ask you, instead of about your specific research program, but to ask you to take a step back a little bit and reflect on what has been, your proudest moment, or one of your proudest moments as a researcher.
That's a hard question to answer, Jonathan, but I will say that several of my proudest moments have been engaging with the communities I work with and collaborate with through my research, and in the past through my filmmaking. So that's the community is the kind of a thread throughout my whole life's work, so to speak. And it is engaging on a kind of daily basis with, people in these communities and amplifying those voices. And because I work with underserved and marginalized communities, it's being able to amplify those voices and give a platform for these counter narratives that usually don't see the light of day otherwise.
Yeah, I could see why that would be very rewarding for sure. If we think now to what you're actually working on at the moment, kind of thing, like what you're in, what project are you working on? Can you tell us a little bit about that, or what maybe something you've just finished, like what you've discovered, what surprised you, excited you about your work?
So there's a few projects on the go right now. I just finished the full manuscript of my first monograph, my book, which is called Game Design Therapoetics, Transformative Making for Self and Society. And I'm negotiating with publishers, academic publishers. So I would like to publish this work. And then the other project, which I'm working on at the moment, is a shirk insight development study together with two researchers here at Laurier, Vanessa Oliver and Michelle Skop, who are stars. And this particular study is it's called Autobiographical Game Design as a sense-making tool for youth living with opioid addiction. And I'm literally in the stages of doing research for that particular study and what will be a game jam or a series of game jams in the future that I will organize in Brantford.
Your comment about the Shirk Insight Grant reminds me, I'm fairly certain I've spoken with you before about CIHR applications as well that you were involved in, or maybe even leading, I can't remember. So you wouldn't be the only researcher that spans those two research councils, but of course, we more commonly see NSERC and CIHR researchers that span those two things. You want to reflect on that at all? Those differences in your work?
So I'm part of this research consortium or research partnership, and I'm collaborating with researchers from OCAD, the Inclusive Design Program. I have a really good colleague and friend that I collaborate with there, and also researchers from University of Toronto, Public Health, and McMaster University School of Nursing, and several universities in Europe. And we've been trying to basically apply for a CIHR grant, which is much harder it's a much harder sell for work that is ultimately qualitative but also in other words, it's looking at the social determinants of health and well-being through my game jam methodology, which when you think about these game design workshops, they kind of open up critical conversations among a number of stakeholders. A number of stakeholders can get together during a game jam to make games together, whether it's community members, researchers, policymakers, and that can open up a rich conversation about a host of issues, including one of the projects that I'm trying to launch is a project on a game jam on long-term care homes and caretakers, informal caretakers.
Right.
So that's the care narrative that I'm looking at, how the care narrative is rendered using games and game design. So I'm still working. I'm still, this is in process. The multi-sectoral dimension of my research is still in process, and I'm trying to figure out a way to speak to those audiences, such as, for example, health researchers and medical researchers that might not be used to my methods, essentially.
Yeah, I wonder, it could be interesting to have, I don't know what you would call it exactly, but I'm sure we could come up with some kind of title. But you think about, like, on the fine arts side, because your background originally is in fine arts, you might think about a residency, like you have an artist in residence, and it might be an artist in residence in a biology department, or in health sciences department, and there's lots that scientists can learn from artists, and artists can learn from scientists, and that interaction can often spur that creativity for the artist. And I wonder if, like, there's some kind of equivalent. What you're doing now is, I wouldn't call art, but I could see where, like, a residence in, like, a health sciences or social work, the faculty of social work, or there's several places you could imagine being able to spend time interacting with people who are tackling maybe similar problems, but with very different approaches from their own disciplines. I can imagine that being a really engaging and stimulating kind of activity. And I have to put that on my list of things to think about trying to facilitate for the future.
It's a fantastic idea, Jonathan.
All right, don't hold me to that as a promise, but I'm going to think about it. I do think there's some value there. Let's think about it. Let me just ask you, we are starting to run low on time. I would like to just ask you, what do you think your colleagues can learn from your work? What should they take away from it? Other than that, it's really interesting. I mean, I think we all got that part.
Well, ultimately, if you're asking me about kind of the big question of my research, ultimately my work is about answering these deeply existential and, in a way, philosophical questions about how we can harness technology, these emerging technologies, such as game design and development, to construct and redefine selfhood and to build communities of mutual care. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, my work is very much, I usually say to people, I study self-care practices and care practices,
Yeah, for sure.
And, so it is a kind of a deeply existential question, I think, that I'm trying to answer in a way.
Can I ask you this, is how sort of accessible is it? Like, if you don't have a background in game design, can you still come to, a game jam and, and benefit from that process? I guess it's really what, I'm trying to get at there.
There's so many tools that are game design tools that are versatile and accessible, and in fact, my work, the game jams that I will be conducting in the future are all with non-professionals. The last game jam I conducted was with professional designers with kind of more advanced skills, but future game jams I will be conducting with non-professionals, people who've never made a game in their life. And given the fact that there's so many versatile tools nowadays and accessible tools, I would like to open up that practice to people who've never made a game, because there are certain kind of timeless and universal practices of game design, such as storytelling and kind of problem solving and analytical, logical, mathematical thinking that are essentially applied to multiple disciplines and skill sets. It's games are a hybrid of art, design, and engineering. They're kind of this incredible practice that covers a wide range of skill sets.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's really interesting. Let me ask you one more question. We're just about out of time. I'm curious how have you managed to be able to, say hold one of your game jams in the pandemic in a virtual way, or I mean, how badly have you been affected by this situation we're all living through here?
Jonathan, that's a great question. It's not impossible to hold a game jam online.
Okay.
In fact, there are game jams that are held entirely online.
Right.
But my work in the past was I was looking at person kind of face-to-face communication and interaction during a game jam. So that has made it a bit difficult. To study a game jam, obviously during the pandemic.
Yeah.
But game jams can be conducted online or some kind of hybrid online in-person method. So that's something to be, potentially look at.
Yeah. Well, if it's ever possible, I don't know if it's allowable, but I would love to be a fly on the wall in one of these and watch you and watch your process. But unfortunately, Sandra, I think we're out of time really this week. So I would just like to ask the audience to join me in thanking our guests. Sandra, thank you so much for sharing your scholarly passions with us today.